Mike Scow, Sports Amigos. What's going on, my brother?
Nothing much, man. It feels like it's all finally starting to come together as we put summer behind us. We get college football going, and we start to see the rest of these sports in college and the rest of the world start, coming back to their stages and back to their own little worlds.
Your Ted Lasso mustache is coming in, by the way. I like
that.
It's getting there.
I think I'll keep it for one more week to for a little bit longer to see how thick I can get the Lasso stash, because I am now a Ted Lasso social media stan account runner. But today is something pretty special for us. We've talked for so long since we started this show last year that this is going to be something, a glorified excuse to talk to people we've worked with, talk to people we have personal relationships with. But we always said this is something we leave room to add to the Rolodex, talk to people that maybe we don't know, talk to people that we've had very brief interactions with. And this is the first time that we're sort of wading into those waters. And I'm looking forward to this one. This guy has been on my list since about the time we started because of what he's done and sort of the niche that he's carved out and he's taken ownership of. But like me, he's Arizona Wildcat, and he's posted up here in Tucson. He covers the U of A, and he's had a pretty good tenure of covering the non-revenue sports. But we'll go ahead and we'll welcome Ryan Kelapire to Sports Amigos. Welcome to this groundbreaking edition, Ryan.
Thanks for having
me. Pronounced it correctly.
Yes,
that's a first. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this.
We appreciate it, and we like getting different takes from people. We like hearing their journalism stories, their sports stories, and we typically like to rewind and sort of take back to the beginning. We know that you rose up through U of A, and you started to find your area and sort of find your voice. But what was it about covering Arizona volleyball, soccer, softball, and these sports that you don't typically see on the main stages like football and basketball? What was it about this area that you felt like diving into and really rooting into?
Well, I didn't really necessarily get into it by plan. I was originally going to the U of A. I was in the School of Management. I was going to go into accounting or do something kind of in the business field. And I took some accounting classes and I was like, yeah, this is not for me. So then I got involved with, I've always liked sports, and, being a sports fan, that means being on Twitter and kind of following reporters. I was like, oh, maybe I'll give that a chance. So I applied to work for the Daily Wildcat, which is the U of A student paper. And I was on their sports desk. And when I joined the staff, I was expecting, they're going to put me on to cover Arizona basketball or to cover Arizona football. Like that's what I was kind of expecting. And I remember my editor at the time, he's like, we're going to put you on the Arizona soccer beat. And it's like, I didn't know anything about Arizona soccer. I didn't even know Arizona even had a soccer team, to be honest. I didn't know anything about the team, the coach, any of the players. And my first reaction was like, oh crap. Like, it's easy to write about things that you're knowledgeable about, but when you don't know anything about a team or a program, or it's pretty daunting. So my first season, I jumped into it and it was pretty rough. I mean, when you don't know much about the program, it's, like I said, it's hard to have, in my opinion, great coverage. But as the time went on, it turned out to be a really good thing for me, because the first thing was I was the only person on the beat. And so when you cover Arizona basketball, Arizona football, those are, major Pac-12 sports, and there's a lot of people there that cover them. You can go a whole season without asking one question. You can still put together some good coverage. But for soccer, I was the only one covering the team. And so I had to ask all my questions for anything I had to do for a preview or a feature. I had to ask everything. And so it was a lot of pressure, but it forced me to kind of step outside my comfort zone and it really challenged me to be better. And I think a lot of my reporting skills I got from that. And then as I did it, I just really enjoyed it. I like kind of the personal connection you have on the beat. If you're the only person covering a team, you have pretty good insight to the team. You get to know the players and the coaches really well. And then, when you're watching them, it's a lot more interesting. I mean, the people personally, their stories and that was fun. And then, like I said, just kind of being I wouldn't say having the exclusivity of it, but being part of a small, it's kind of like each team's kind of like its own little community. Arizona softball has their diehard fans and the parents and the players, obviously, and that's true for volleyball and soccer. So like when you're covering those teams, it's like you're part of that community, where you don't necessarily get that when you're covering a huge sport with mass appeal like the basketball and football.
So both Brandon and I have our experience. We come from the TV side of this, but we've also covered the smaller non-revenue sports. And Brandon and I have each developed some pretty cool, pretty valuable relationships with some of the players in the past and some of the coaches. In my case, it was covering Oregon women's basketball, getting to know Kelly Graves, and we sort of developed a coffee buddy relationship kind of thing. And I know that you have that opportunity. You talk to the likes of Mike Candrea a lot. You talk to all these players and all these coaches. How far does that go when you're that constant presence? You're not part of the team, but in ways I imagine they still sort of see you as part of their circle because you're around them all the time. So how valuable are those relationships and building that rapport with people who don't really get a lot of that coverage?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that you earn their trust. When you first start as a reporter and you might ask them a question that a coach might take a certain way, or maybe they might misunderstand you and they'll take it the wrong way. But when you're around the team on a consistent basis, they know that you have good intentions and you're just trying to do your job, and they're a lot more understanding. They're a little bit more patient with you. And then, like anything else, the more you're around somebody, the more comfortable you are with them. So you'll open up a little bit. I mean, there's been players who I've interviewed for the first time, and you can tell maybe that is, especially in the smaller sports, that maybe they've never interviewed with somebody before and they're kind of tense. But the more you talk to them, the more you interview them throughout the season and throughout their career, they loosen up. And that's really when you get the best answers that you're going to get as far as interviewing. And then on top of that, part of journalism is digging for information and having the best insight. And when the coaches know you and trust you, you'll get a lot more information than if you're someone who just pops in every now and then.
Brandon,
yeah, Ryan. So let's talk about Brian. Let's talk about where you work right now. AZ Desert Swarm. Right? Am I saying that right?
Correct.com. Correct.
Yeah, editor in chief. Let's talk about what you're. Just for folks that don't know exactly what you do, what sports you're exactly covering right now. Let's just dive into the job you have now, and the form of media you're in continues to evolve with social media for sure. And let's talk about that too.
Yeah, so I run the Arizona Wildcats SB Nation site. We cover anything relevant to U of A sports, whether that's the main sports like football or basketball, the non-rev sports like soccer, volleyball, and softball. Anything that I think Arizona fans are interested in, we try to cover. We really pride ourselves, especially on the non-rev sports, because when I was working for the Daily Wildcat, that was kind of my background, and I had a lot of relationships with those programs, and so I figured, I might as well just keep covering them. I really enjoy it. Those players and teams deserve to have their stories told, so we've kind of stuck with it. But obviously, you mentioned like the media landscape. There's a lot of things that I'm sure anybody in the industry can agree that they don't necessarily like about the industry. There's a lot of things that you have to write that you might not necessarily want to write, but people will find it interesting, whether that's recruiting offers or visits or new uniforms, things that you wouldn't necessarily describe as journalism, but because of how the industry works, you have to do it anyway. So there's definitely it's a lot of fun, but there's also some downsides too. Plus it's the grind of being in a news cycle 24/7. I mean, I'm on this podcast with you guys now, but if there's a football commit or something, that would take me away from this once I'm done. So it's there's a lot of fun parts to it, but it can be really stressful at times as well.
And I'm curious how you use social media, because everyone, whether you're TV, radio, or a beat writer, print, online, what have you, everyone can put themselves on camera. You can present your content in all kinds of different ways. What's your preference in how you're presenting your content? Because I imagine if you wanted to, and if you're interested in it, interested in it, you can get some sort of on-camera reps and diversify the kind of media you're doing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think Twitter, if you're a reporter, that's an amazing tool. You can reach a ton of people. You can build connections. I mean, Mike messaged me through Twitter to set up this interview. So there you go. It's a very valuable tool. And then, whether you're talking about just tweeting with text, or like you said, you can do stand-ups on video. You can do breakdown. You can post breakdown videos on Twitter. There's all kinds of different avenues you can go with that. But I think just the most important thing is it allows you to reach a large audience, just because you never know if you tweet something out, you never know who's going to pick it up. Like the Arizona's playing BYU in football on Saturday, and BYU has a huge fan base. So I tweeted something about one of the comments that Arizona defensive coordinator made about the game, and a bunch of BYU fans picked it up and they all found it interesting. And it kind of stirs up the rivalry a little bit. People, you don't know who's my advice to young journalists is that you don't know when you tweet something out, you never know who's going to see it. And same with when you write a story. When you write a story, you never know who's going to read it. Someone might reach out to you that you never expected. Someone might see it that you never expected. You never know where that can lead.
So taking a step back, but still looking at the social media part of this, and really just your approach in general, what, if I'm sure you've had run-ins with kids from the Daily Wildcat who are trying to find their voice and trying to sort of establish themselves and figure out, how do I do this? What is it you would tell them about this? You mentioned what your lessons are for social media, but in this world in general, in this niche that you've taken ownership of, what would you say to them about writing stories, about getting the information, and about building those relationships?
I think a big thing that's worked for me is just be consistent if you can. I mean, it's very difficult for journalists to put a lot of, as much time as they would want into it, because they are balancing other things, school and maybe other jobs. But be consistent. And then also, I think the other thing is be unique. Find a role that is unique to you and that you really enjoy. I mean, for me, that was the non-rep sports. For someone else, that might be, maybe they played high school basketball and basketball really well, and you can break that down and do film room studies with players and coaches and things like that. And then also, like, my strategy on Twitter, it's kind of changed over the years. I used to be, I guess what you call like a bulk tweeter, where I would just tweet a lot of information. Now I've kind of taken the quality over quantity perspective, where everything that I tweet, I try to make it as interesting as possible and compelling as possible. That way, when people see your tweets, they know it's important. It's not just every little thought that comes to mind, or every little bit of tidbit of information that you have that, frankly, someone might not find that interesting. But I would definitely say finding that unique role that can separate you from everyone else. Because if you try to do the same thing that everyone else is doing, at that point, then you better make sure you're working harder than everybody, because this is a very competitive industry.
So piggybacking off what you said about quantity versus quality, what was the Twitter reaction and engagement like with the quantity, and how has it changed, or how is it different when you're focusing on quality?
That's a good question. I think when you tweet less, and I think you tend to get more engagement, because, like I said, I think people know that what you're tweeting is important, as opposed to if you're someone that tweets 5 times an hour and you just put every little thing out there. I think people just kind of scroll by it and, oh, well, this guy always tweets stuff, so why is this that important? And I've kind of noticed that just when if you don't tweet often, you'll get more replies, or, like I said, people just find it more compelling, I think. But that being said, you have to make sure what you're tweeting is actually compelling. Like, just because you're tweeting only once or twice a day is not necessarily a good thing either.
Ryan, so are you born and raised in Tucson?
I'm not. I'm originally from the Bay Area, actually.
Okay. And since college, you've stayed in Arizona?
Correct.
Cool. So I'm curious, we Mike and I bounced around a bit. He went from Arizona to Texas to Oregon, back home. I've gone from California to Texas, now in New Mexico. How much do you look into the future and think about places you want to end up? Because that could be a tricky thing. You can make a goal and be a little too focused on that, and then be complacent on what you're doing, and miss out on opportunities. So yeah, I'm curious where you're kind of at with life in that sense.
Yeah, well, I kind of operate by like the mantra, you don't want to run away from a good thing, but at the same time in this industry, you always have to be looking to move up and what the next step is and kind of taking it to another level. So I'm not really sure, to be honest. That's a really good question. I'm always looking for things, but like I said, I really like what I'm doing now. So it would have to be the right opportunity for me. And, and now with COVID, it's so interesting because like working from home is really common, and Zoom is such a common form of technology now that, you can, like this, I mean, you can have a podcast where you're talking to someone from a different state very easily. You can interview people very easily face to face now. And before COVID, I remember like today, for instance, I did my soccer interviews through Zoom. And in the past, it would always be through in-person interviews, usually on campus or at their practice field or something. And you kind of think about that, and it's like, well, literally anybody could have done the interviews that I did today. You could have been across the world and you could have done them. You don't necessarily have to be based in the city of the teams that you're covering. So I think it's a very
true. Yeah.
Very interesting. That's a very interesting development.
I feel like it's become a little more common that I've seen where journalists who go to college in one place will get their first job in that market or in that area. For Brandon and I, our first job was outside of the market that we went to college in, outside of our homes. And so I'm curious of your take and your thoughts on going to college at the U of A, then still covering the U of A, and how you balance that. This is the school that I went to. I went to sporting events here. I hyped up my team, and be able to sort of switch that fan hat out for that journalist hat, and sort of how you balance it, how you still sort of enjoy it, I guess, and still try and do the job. Because I know I think everybody would say, and Brandon and I have both had these moments where we're covering something and a really cool play happens, and we can't help but react like just about any other fan would.
Yeah, it's easy to be Homer Simpson when you've gone to the school that you're now covering. So I'm curious on where you land on that too, and if you're mindful of, okay, I gotta be down the middle.
Yeah, it's interesting. People have asked me about that before, and I think the sad answer that I give is that the more, and at least in my experience, the more that I've covered the teams, the less I care about wins and losses, and the more I care about the storylines. And so,
that's good. That's
so
really good, actually.
Yeah. So now when I watch, U of A games, like as sad as it is to say, and I know people who like I went to school with, and they're like disappointed in me, but I don't like when they win a game, I'm not going crazy happy or anything like that. And when they lose, I don't necessarily feel sad, or it's a really strange. It's not something I did by design. It just kind of happens. Like when it's your job to report on a team, you don't really have time to get caught up in that.
Well, that's the professional way to do it, because I work in Albuquerque where there are dozens of media members that have been here for 20 plus years. And you have some that can stay down the middle, and then there's some that are absolute homers. And it's interesting to see how people's passion / professionalism can blend together or stay very separate. And I feel like I'm in the same boat as you. I can stay extremely separate the longer I stay in a market.
Well, and there's definitely some advantages to like for me being a U of A grad, because I know the traditions of the programs. I know the history of the programs more than someone who would be coming from a different market. And so you can really use that to your advantage. But again, you just have to be careful that it's not your coverage is still objective and fair. And it hasn't really been that difficult for me, but I can definitely, I think, people, if you tell them like, oh, I cover U of A stuff, but I also went to the U of A, there is kind of that assumption that it's like, oh, well, obviously this is always going to be a homer view, but I don't
Right.
necessarily think that has to be true all the time. And for me, it's happened naturally. And I've gotten a lot of flack for that when someone's like, "Oh, Arizona won. Are you happy about that?" And it's like, kind of, I don't know. Like
It's easy.
not
It's easier
like
to interview them when they win. That's for sure.
Oh yeah. Yes, that is definitely true.
Ryan, how long you been out of school now?
For 3 years.
Okay, because you look like you could be a freshman in college.
Oh,
so congratulations on that.
I was on campus. I think it was like a couple of years ago. It was one of my first or second years out of school. And I was standing in front of the library because all the, U of A facilities are on campus and we do all the interviews on campus. So I'm still on campus quite a bit. And someone came up to me and they're like, "Are you a freshman?" And I just
There
laughed.
you go.
I literally graduated 2 years ago. So.
Proof right there. No, enjoy that. Enjoy that while it lasts. It doesn't last forever, for most of us at least. So
yeah, you'll get to the point where it goes from you're 30, you look like you're 23. It'll go from that to I don't need to card you anymore. Very
like
quickly. Don't worry.
Yeah, you're 30. You could be 30 to 37. Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it probably works to my advantage just because when I'm interviewing, some of the student athletes, it's easier for them to talk to somebody who's their own age rather than someone who's older. At least that's the kind of the perception that I've gotten.
This does bring up something interesting though, because I would say the first 7 years of my broadcasting career, I looked significantly younger than I do now. I've become a father in the last 4 years, and that has aged me significantly. And what I'm getting to though is the first 7 years looking a bit younger, you can be treated a bit differently by coaches, especially when you get into the covering a Pac-12 school, interviewing professional athletes. You're looked at a little differently when you look younger than when you look older. I just feel like that's a fact. So especially right out of college, how many moments did you have like that with, interviewing future lottery picks, a Sean Miller, a Kevin Sumlin? Did you notice any difference in treatment or just interaction?
Not a whole lot, to be honest, but I think a lot of that is because I cover college sports. And so the people I'm interviewing, assuming it's not the coaches, like the student athletes that I'm interviewing, I'm older than, where if I were covering, let's say, instead of Arizona basketball, I was covering the Phoenix Suns, and now all of a sudden the people that you're interviewing are older than you, then maybe I would feel that a little bit. But I think with some of the coaches, I definitely think there's kind of a feeling out period where they really just kind of want to know how much do you care about their team and their sport versus are you just using this as a stepping stone? And I think a lot of coaches and players can kind of sense that. And then I think they can really sense too when you're passionate about their teams and their programs. And I also think that kind of it shows up in your coverage too. If you just look at it as, I have to cover this team versus I want to cover this team.
Yeah.
There's a big difference in your coverage. Like if you look at like my Arizona soccer coverage, for instance, is something that I do mostly for fun. It's not page view wise. It doesn't drive our site compared to the major sports like basketball or football, but I enjoy it.
It's got your interest. Yeah.
You would see that in my coverage versus an article that I have to write because it's something that people will find interesting, even if I don't necessarily find it interesting personally.
Right.
So the flavor of the last few months has been the whole name, image, likeness thing. And everything that we've seen tied to that has really just been coming from football, men's basketball, and I want to say like a few sprinklings of women's basketball and maybe a name here or there from the different revenue sports. So I'm curious from the lens of the softballs, the volleyballs, the soccers of the world. How have you seen that translate down to some of these different sports that aren't making those day-to-day headlines? And have you heard a buzz from any of the players in particular?
There hasn't been too much of that at U of A yet, but those sports that you mentioned, other than volleyball, they haven't been in season yet. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking of a scenario for Arizona softball team this past season had the rules been in place, and they had Deja Mulipola, who was an Olympian, and that I'm sure would have led to all kinds of opportunities. They had Jessie Harper, who was climbing up the all-time home run leaderboard. I think she finished tied for second all time.
Yep.
And so there's definitely opportunities, and you look at some of their social media followings, and a lot of them have thousands and thousands of followers, and they're definitely marketable. Like I said, I personally haven't seen a lot at the U of A yet. And then like Ari McDonald, I mean, when she had that run to the national championship game last spring, I mean, it's like there's no doubt that she would have been able to draw some interest from some of these companies and get some sponsorships. But this season will be really interesting. The women's basketball program in Tucson's become super popular, and they have a couple players who have been there for 4 or 5 years now. And so it'll be interesting, like for players like them, what kind of deals they might be able to strike.
Well, on that subject, on NIL, I'm curious, either of you on TikTok at all?
No.
I'm holding off as long as I can.
Yeah.
Good man.
Same here. Yeah. Being a current sports journalist, it's harder and harder to fight the new trends, especially when it comes to things like TikTok. But I've noticed just from people tweeting and posting on Facebook their TikTok videos and whatnot, that is a big generator, I feel like, when it comes to college athletes trying to come up with a viral video or try to make some money on social media platforms. That's a big one. I feel like that social media in general, that platform and NIL are going hand in hand right now, and college athletes are trying to make a few bucks there. I mean, to me, like making a few bucks for a couple of meals a week, or a couple of bucks to buy some books. I mean, these scholarships are great and all, but these student athletes are living on the poverty line when it comes down to it. But getting back to the social media aspect, yeah, I'm curious how much you two have noticed that from afar. Even though, Mike, I know you're not in sports right now, but you're certainly on social media quite a bit. And I'm curious how much you guys are noticing that part of NIL and how people are trying to dive into it.
Oh, it's definitely a huge part. I'm thinking about this doesn't necessarily pertain to NIL, but in the women's NCAA tournament this past spring, there was a big controversy over their facilities not being equal, and that was unearthed because someone posted a video on TikTok.
Sedona Prince. That was Sedona Prince up in Oregon.
Right. She compared the facilities from the men's tournament and the women's tournament, and it caught the eye of a lot of people, and it became a national story, and they got it fixed because of it. And so I think it's just the dynamic of these student athletes having their own platform at all times. I mean, back in the day,
platform and power. I love the power that they're showing they can have if they use it properly.
Yeah. And that can be a good thing at times. It can be a really bad thing if they don't use it right. But I think it's just interesting that it's very easy for these athletes to kind of get a message out there, or in NIL case to sponsor a brand and put, if you just imagine a scenario where someone on the softball team hits like 2 home runs and they're sponsored by like a protein powder or something. And they'd be like, those 2 home runs today were courtesy of so-and-so protein powder.
It's going to get there at some point.
It will.
Yeah. We are in the baby stages of what is to come. There's going to be a lot. I mean, especially with the alliances now happening. I mean, the NCAA, the clock is ticking on if they can adapt. Because if they can't properly adapt and compensate athletes the way that they need to be, I mean, the game's going to change really quick. And social media is a big part of it, I feel like.
I feel like they're already starting to change. And I think a credit to a lot of these athletes that are using the huddles, the TikToks, the Twitters, and that, it feels like they're becoming more creative and more aggressive in getting their name out there. And I'm curious, Ryan, have you seen that really manifested in a way that I feel like it is?
I think there's definitely an awareness among the players of now how valuable a social media brand can be. I think a lot of times, in the past, student athletes might have been afraid to put themselves out there because they were more afraid of the negative consequences that could come along with it. Like, if I say,
oh my God, yeah,
if I
so
say
much negative stuff.
Right. If I tweet something and it gets misconstrued, then, the school won't be happy with me, or a coach won't be happy with me. I mean, you saw coaches used to ban their players from social media during the season. It's like, now if you tried that as a coach, like no one's going to want to play for you because they'd be taking away a powerful tool from you. And so
well, and then the mental health aspect of it too, like some student athletes cannot handle getting the amount of hate that
right.
comes their way, whether they're a good person or not. I mean, there's just going to be haters out there for whatever reason. And
from your own
yeah,
fan base.
yeah, from your own fan base. If you have one bad game, you're going to get all kinds of angry messages and comments and whatnot. And I think coaches try to protect their players to a certain extent away from that, because some players just can't handle that.
Yeah, and that's going to be a whole new thing too. I mean, there's a lot of in high school, and a lot of college athletes don't really they've never really gotten outside criticism before. But if you're someone who's going to be very active on social media and using those platforms to promote yourself, and obviously social media in general, a lot of it is self-promotion. And when you're talking about how great you are, or maybe you're tweeting out some video that's sponsored and it's like a highlight reel, like you mentioned Huddle, and then all of a sudden you don't play well, or you don't play as well as you thought, or as people thought you would, then you are going to get some of that. And teaching these student athletes how to handle it or how to ignore it, I think, is something that cannot be overlooked. And these schools really need to look into, because you're going to get that. I mean, Mike I know has covered sports, and that there's fans out there that are vicious. I mean, even recruits get nasty messages if they don't in school. And it's like, you step back and think, and it's like, this is a grown man tweeting at a 16-year-old. Like, it would never happen. It would never happen in real life, but because it's, through a screen, people are a lot more courageous than they would want to be.
You hide behind your handle. Right.
Yeah. I remember, I think this was maybe right before you started at U of A. I think it was Max Zendejas, kicker on the football team against ASU. He had a chance to, he had a chance to, it's all good. He had a chance to kick like a 25, 30-yard chip shot for the win of the Territorial Cup. And he pushed it, goes wide right, and he's eviscerated, yelled horrible things by the fans in the stands. This is before Twitter really became a thing. And that's the people in front of him. That's the people looking in him eye to eye. That's not the people who are going to knee jerk on Twitter and call him incredible names and awful things.
Something similar actually happened to another Arizona kicker years after that. And it was actually on social media. He got all these mean tweets, and he actually posted an apology. He missed the kick. I believe it was against ASU. So it cost them the Territorial Cup. And, he posted an apology on Twitter, and, the reaction was, mostly like, oh, there's no need to apologize. But but that it just tells you that there's probably a lot of people messaging him or tweeting at him all these nasty things of, oh, you cost us this game. And then, like I said, you just take a step back, and it's like, you're tweeting this at a college student. It's not, it's not a pro kicker. So it's kind of makes you,
that's the thing, Ryan, is that we're really moving closer and closer to college sports being recognized as professional sports, because there's billions of dollars, especially when you talk about football and basketball, the billions of dollars at stake with the NCAA and the TV money and stuff. People care that much because they watch it on TV, and because these athletes get, put on a pedestal to a certain extent. And that's part of, the reason the passion is there. I'll never condone, crossing the line, when it comes to angry messages, death threats that people can get from time to time when situations like this happen. It's a crazy world out there when it comes to a current student athlete being on Twitter. And then if you're just on Twitter, you can get found by your fans, and that's could be a good or bad thing. Mostly bad, especially if you're on a team that's struggling, and you're going to just see some messages you never want to see. It's I don't envy them in that aspect.
So Ryan, I'm curious, because I think all three of us have been here. I never really experienced it much when I was working in news and sports and that, but what's the craziest, maybe the most or the worst thing that somebody has said to you on,
Mm,
in an
yeah.
email,
We can get it
or
too. Media can get it
right,
too, for sure.
right.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to sort of to the effect of those keyboard warriors. What's the worst that you've seen as a result of just the work you do to make a living?
I mean, you get called a nasty reporter, you get emails, and oh, you'll never make it in this industry. And usually, what it's usually, unfortunately, like 100% of the time, it's been player parents who send you that kind of stuff.
Wow.
Um,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
I mean, it's a bit. I mean, I don't want to, make it sound like that's common. I mean, I've maybe gotten like 3 emails like that, or 3 emails or messages like that in the years that I've been doing this. But you definitely have to be aware of it, and you're going to get it. Or all the time people criticize your writing, or if you are writing something that's more opinionated, people are going to say, "Oh, that's such a dumb take," and you have to be able to handle criticism. And a lot of times, I think the criticism in a way can help you, because you might write something and you might not exactly see how it could have come off the way that the way they saw it. But yeah, you definitely, it's not exclusive to athletes when it comes to having thick skin.
No.
When you're a media member, you're a public figure in a lot of ways. So
Can be. Yeah.
people are going to come at you, and a lot of times it's like you'll report something that's bad, and people, instead of being like angry at the news, they're angry at you. And you see that a lot. That was really true when the Arizona basketball program was involved with the FBI investigation, everything. Like if you tweeted something about, maybe the implications of it, or just an additional detail, you have some fans that would come after you. And especially
Why are you doing this to us?
right, and especially being a U of A grad, why are you doing this to your own school?
You're turning on us. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So there's definitely a lot of that. I wouldn't say it's totally common, but I've definitely gotten nasty reporter. The funniest one I ever got was I forgot, I don't even remember what the original tweet was, but I got something and it was like, oh, it was a football tweet or something, and it was like, stick to covering women's soccer. Like that's what someone said. And I was like, that's not the insult that you think it is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mike, what about you? What's the worst or nastiest thing someone emailed you or tweeted at you? I think we've all had something in that realm.
I mean, it never really got. There were some vulgar comments, some vulgar emails, but it never really got over the top in terms of like, repetitive swear words. It never got that bad for me. I got a lot of like, the most frequent one that I got was the belligerent, why are you coming down on my team? And why do you hate us all? And in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, you haven't won a game in 2 years. Why do you think? Stuff like that. But
Ryan, have you had to cover high school sports yet?
I have not. No.
Bless your heart. Yeah, because you can't please everybody. Like I cover literally the entire state of New Mexico, so we can only drive so far, and cover so many teams. Well, now we can do everything on Zoom, but there's only so much time you have in a day to cover as many teams as you can. And there's going to be a team, 3.5 hours away that is tucked in the middle of nowhere that you're not covering, and you're going to get some angry emails from them. I think the funniest things for me, when I first got to Albuquerque, I replaced someone that had been in this spot I'm in for 25 years. And within the first week, I had people saying like, oh, bring so-and-so back. You suck. Or like stuff of that nature. And I'm like, I don't suck. You just, you're just a hater. So you just got used to someone, used to watching the same person for 25 years. You got to have thick skin, no doubt about it though. Because there's going to be some messages that come and maybe sting a little bit, maybe have some truth to it. But, you just roll with the punches, I guess.
And you're going to make mistakes too. I mean, you might ask.
100%.
Question to
especially on Twitter. You can't even edit your mistakes on Twitter.
Even just when you're interviewing someone, I mean, you might interview somebody and accidentally say the wrong name, or you'll say, oh, this is the first time since this year. And they'll be like, oh, that's not true. And you have to not get defensive about it and kind of look back at it and be like, oh, then yeah, they're right. I need to be better.
Gotta be on your game. Yeah. Mike, do you think it's a good time to go to the lightning round?
I believe it is. Let's do this thing. Okay, so this has been a staple of what we do, And
every episode we've been
yes.
doing this. Yes.
So we say lightning round. It's more like lightning round. And we'll ask you 10 questions, but we don't necessarily need a rapid fire response. So we'll give you time and let you.
It can be if you want to, but you can take your time.
Yeah. But like we try and tailor these questions to each person who comes on. So kind of like, have you seen the show Hot Ones?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of like that, where yes, we'll do dives on people's social media to see what non-sports stuff are they posting about. But we like to have fun, and so it provides good banter and some good back and forth. But in this case, we'll go ahead and we'll get this started. 10 questions, 10 answers, starting with the most valuable journalism lesson you've learned.
If you're driving 2 hours to cover a game, you better make sure you record the interviews. That's what I've learned. That your
press record.
What's the lesson learned from that? What's the memory?
Yeah. Where's the nightmare? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where's it happened?
Okay. Well, I drove 2 hours to cover an Arizona soccer game in Tempe. It was a really big game. And for the Daily Wildcat, we used to have 3 sources for our articles in order to get paid for them. So I had 2, and the third one I screwed up and I didn't record it.
Oh,
and
no.
I was like, I really drove 3 hours for this. So then against the typical rules, I reached out to the player on social media and said like, hey, I need a quote. Like, can you just type something that's, even if it's like the most PR quote ever, like I just need something. And the quote ended up being something like, the girl was actually from that area. So her quote was like, oh, it was so great to be back and play in front of family and score. So I was like, I don't care. That's good enough.
Thank you for the save.
Yeah. So now I always check, is my phone recording? And now I actually, like when I do Zoom interviews, I not only record through Zoom, I also record through my computer and through my phone. So so that's never happening again. So it's true. You learn from your mistakes.
Very smart.
I love that. I love the triple option there that you have with that. Okay, next question. What is the most important quality you believe a journalist should have?
Ooh, that's a good question. Most important quality. Well, I think in sports media, what I've realized, it's not your passion for sports that is going to take you far. It's your passion for storytelling and part of the news cycle that's really going to make this something that you enjoy doing. Because like I was kind of saying earlier, being a fan wears off pretty quickly when you're in the grind of putting together stories and content and things like that. So I think the best quality is you have to like the journalism aspect of the job. Just because you like sports doesn't mean you're going to be a good sports journalist, or it's something that you're going to like to do.
All right. Since we all love sports, I'm sure we all have our own bucket list. What does your sports bucket list consist of right now?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Like things he hasn't covered?
Or hasn't covered or seen as a fan, as a journalist, either way.
Yeah, I'm a huge baseball fan, so I'd love to go to a World Series. There's a bunch of different ballparks I haven't been to. Wrigley Field, Fenway Park. I know Camden Yards. I was going to go there as a kid one time, and the game got rained out. I'm from California. I've been to Petco Park. I've been to the Bay Area stadiums. I've never been to Dodger Stadium. I don't like the Dodgers, but I would like to go to their stadium. So it's mostly like MLB things. I'm a Raider fan, so going to a Raider game in the new stadium. I'll be at their new stadium this weekend for an Arizona BYU game, but it's not a Raider game. So that.
Oh, bummer. Yeah.
And then I look at like overseas sports. I'm like going to one of those huge soccer matches in Europe, whether that's like Manchester United or one of those games where maybe like El Clasico or something between Real Madrid. Yeah. Just something
the
like
Mighty Reds.
Yeah, just something like that where it's, I don't know what the crowds are at those events, but I imagine it's like 100,000 or something like that. I would just love to do it. Maybe an Ohio State football game at the Big House, just some of those like those huge environments, Alabama, Auburn, and the Iron Bowl. I mean, college sports, there's so many unique environments. There's like, I try to go to as many road games as I possibly can just to check them out. The Pac-12, unfortunately, isn't as I wouldn't say it's as passionate about some of the SEC schools, but there's a lot of different colleges I'd like to go visit.
I can't stand Duke, and North Carolina is a few steps below that, but I would love to see a game at Cameron Indoor.
Oh,
Anytime.
Yeah, right.
That's on my list.
I'd love to be in
Brandon.
the section for one of those games.
Yes. Oh man.
North Carolina. I would love to do that.
Yep. Okay. What is your favorite U of A sports event memory? If you got a couple of them, that's fine. And I'll give one of my favorites. I was second row behind the UCLA goal in the second half when Salim Stoudemire iced it from the parking lot.
Well, if we're talking about in person, the 2019 Super Regionals for Arizona softball, the final out was a really big one. They played Ole Miss. I mean, they pretty much dominated that series, but they snapped an 8-year Women's College World Series drought. And the thing is, my first season on the beat was 2017, and they were the number 2 seed in the country. They were up 1-0 in the best of 3 Super, and they lost the last 2 games in pretty heartbreaking fashion to get eliminated from the tournament. And so like that, and when you talk about like games I'll never forget covering, it's those, not for a good reason from a, U of A person's perspective, but I'll never forget those games. Anytime watching DeAndre Ayton play, I mean, that wasn't fair. I mean, that guy was just, he shouldn't have been in college basketball. He was way too good for that.
He's a freak.
that Arizona team didn't win. That's another like bad memory that I'll never forget is I was in Boise for that NCAA tournament game when Arizona with DeAndre Ayton got destroyed by Buffalo. And you kind of sit there and it's like, how is this team with this generational big man going to lose by 20 to a double-digit seed? I'll never forget that. College game day's been at the U of A a couple times. The football one's really fun. They also had the basketball one, which is a little bit less of an event, but I got to meet Jay Billis and Reese Davis and all those guys. I've been to the Arizona Cardinals Stadium to cover Arizona BYU. The Pac-12 tournament in Las Vegas is always fun. There's a lot of different things. That's one of the coolest things about covering sports is you just have opportunities to travel and go to all these events that, as a kid that you watched on TV, or just events that people in general love to go to, and you get paid to go to them. And obviously you're working too. And so you're not able to enjoy them maybe as much as you would as a fan, but it's definitely still a privilege.
Brandon, I'm curious if you have a favorite memory that you've been to as a fan or covered.
State championships in Texas were awesome. Especially Mike and I got to cover the last state championship that we were both in Abilene for in West Texas. We saw 2 of the teams we cover in the same day win state championships. Like, yeah, I mean, that was just kind of like the pinnacle of working in the big country. And yeah, like that's the first thing that stands out. And plus you had someone like James Washington taking over, who ended up now plays with the Steelers. I don't know if he'll be traded by the time we air this podcast, but apparently he wanted to be traded. But anyway, that's the first thing that comes off the top of my head. There's been some great stuff in Albuquerque, college and high school. That's been Ryan, and just to familiarize yourself with my work, a lot of mine's been high school and college. So, when it comes to state championships in high school, and then when your teams can make it to the NCAA tournament, that's always really neat. Yeah, number one, it's going to be hard to beat state championships in Texas because it doesn't get any bigger than that in the Lone Star State.
I made a very glaring omission. I was at the women's Final Four in April when Arizona was in the national championship game, and they beat UConn pretty easily, which to get there. And that was, I'll never forget that because UConn is obviously the Goliath of college basketball. And that national championship game was a classic. Arizona lost at one point. They had the final shot. Ari McDonald she couldn't get anything to go, but it was one of those, I feel like in not many moments in sports is a championship game come down to the last play like that. And where if you make a shot, you win the national championship, and you miss it, and you don't. And all it is one shot that makes makes you feel the greatest you've ever felt in your life, or maybe the rest of life. You look back at that and you're like, man, if I could have just made that one shot.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to the next question. And this could be for a variety of reasons. So we'll, answer how you see fit. But who's the most memorable coach or player you've interviewed?
It's another good question. I've been kind of spoiled at Arizona because, Mike Andrea covering Arizona softball. Getting to talk to him every week. It just, he's won 8 national championships and been to the Olympics, and he really stands out. And then you talk about, I think one thing, Adia Barnes has been really fascinating to watch her coaching career, because she was kind of not necessarily an unknown, but when she was hired by Arizona, it was, she was a former player at Arizona, so everyone knew who she was, but there was kind of a sense of, oh, can she coach? And
right.
The last 5 seasons it's been amazing to watch her climb to the top. And it was especially interesting too, having her team make the national championship game and seeing the national media really pick up on her. And it's like, wow, she's a star in this profession. And to be someone who's been, like, I covered her introductory press conference for the Daily Wildcat. So for me to see her go from, alumni who's, we'll see how she can coach, to, oh, now she's clearly one of the top coaches in the sport. Like, that's been pretty amazing.
Okay, moving on to the next one. What's been the most impactful moment for Arizona athletics, good or bad, in the last year? And I know that's loaded because so much has happened, from Sean Miller being fired, Kevin Sumlin being fired, Adia Barnes going to the Final Four, and then the national title. Tommy, so much has been going on, but what do you think has sort of been the most impactful in the last year?
I think, because football is the most important sport. I think because football is the most important sport for college sports. I think the hiring of Jed Fish has been huge for Arizona. The football program, they were on a 12-game losing. They're still on a 12-game losing streak. They haven't snapped it yet. And
Wait, hold up. But even in Arizona, you wouldn't say the men's basketball coaching change isn't a bigger deal? You feel like football is a bigger deal?
Well, the basketball program wasn't necessarily in bad shape. The team, they've got some good players coming back. The football program, I mean, you could argue it's rock bottom.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's a good point.
And to see how much Jed Fish has come in and really done all the right things, and to be able to bring such life to the program is pretty remarkable, considering they haven't won a game since 2019. And the thing is I think this is true for a lot of schools. Like, when your football program is doing well, it kind of bleeds into all the other departments. And I think a lot, because it is the sport that produces the most revenue. But I think that's just a really big thing, because there's so much apathy in Arizona football, during that losing streak and during the previous coaching regime, that for someone like Jed Fish to come in, and his hiring was met with a lot of skepticism. I mean, he's a guy who's never been a college head coach. He'd been in a bunch of different assistant jobs in the NFL. And for him to come in and, in 8 months without even playing one game, to be able to energize the fan base, I think has been really big. The other answer to this question would be Mike Andrea's retirement, because he's the greatest softball coach in college in college history. So just the impact that he's had, not only on the Arizona program, I mean, he's the only coach they've had since 1983 or whatever the first year was. And the fact that the amount of the impact that he's had, not only on Arizona's program, but the sport as a whole, he can't be replaced. And it'll be really, it's the end of an era, and it'll be really interesting to see how the Arizona softball program continues from here. Although one of his former players, Caitlin Lowe, is coaching the team now, so there's still that connection.
Everybody loves their food. Tucson has some pretty awesome spots. And what is your go-to Tucson stop? It doesn't have to be a college haunt, but what's your go-to stop for a bite?
I think it depends. Like, if you're someone that hasn't been to Tucson, I think you definitely have to go with Mexican food. And I like BK Tacos. They have really good Sonoran hot dogs, which is a staple in Tucson. Like, if you come to Tucson and you're not going to come back, like, you got to get at least one Sonoran hot dog.
Am I remembering the one that Sarah brought up, the taco shop? Is that a Tucson place, or is that somewhere else?
Oh,
well, there are places in Tucson called the Taco Shop. I wouldn't necessarily call that a famous staple, but there's plenty of
I
place.
think that was a Sarah favorite. Sarah Cazell. Is that who I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. Sarah Cazell.
Yeah, she was on the podcast.
Mhm. Okay,
All right.
so yeah, Mexican food you go to. Okay, now your hobbies outside of covering sports are still pretty active. I know you are an avid hiking fan, and you try to find a trail just about anywhere you go whenever you can. So, what are your favorite hiking trails that you've had the opportunity to walk down?
Well, I usually go to Sabino Canyon. I mean, one of the great things about Tucson is you're never far from a national park. I mean, it takes me 10, 15 minutes to drive there. And there's a whole bunch of different trails in there. There's Seven Falls, which takes you to a beautiful waterfall. And it's not really something you'd expect to see from the desert. For me, I like open spaces. I'm not someone that likes to climb a lot, I would say, especially because I go by myself a lot and find that to be kind of dangerous when you're by yourself and climbing. But Sabino Canyon's my go-to spot. Saguaro National Park, that's on the other side of town.
Yeah,
That's a beautiful spot. And I'm also from the Bay Area. I'm from the Bay Area, so when I go back and visit there, I'm from the East Bay. There's a lot of trails there.
Yeah, beautiful.
I don't know. I wish I knew the names of them specifically better. Like I hike up toward Mount Diablo, like that's the mountain near the hometown that I'm from. But just I'm someone I like open space. It's when you're in sports media, it's very hectic a lot of the times. You don't have a traditional schedule, and you're, especially when you're covering games and events, you're around a lot of people, and so that's kind of my way of decompressing.
okay, and piggybacking off of that, do you have a hiking trail bucket list? Any pictures or things that you've seen that you said, I'm stocking that away for later?
I always see ones in Montana. I don't know the, but I always see trails in Montana where it's the mountains, the lakes, the evergreen trees, and I'd love to go there. Alaska during the summer sometime. It's the same thing. It's kind of that foresty with lakes and streams. I think that'd be really fun. I've been to Yosemite, not for a long time. I used to go there as a kid quite often, but Yosemite, Yellowstone, I've never been to. I'd love to go to Yellowstone sometime. Yeah. Even like Zion National Park in Utah. I think that place is pretty amazing. I've been to the Grand Canyon. If you haven't been there before, I definitely recommend that. It's one of those places where you look at it and it almost looks like a painting. You can't believe what you're looking at. It's pretty amazing.
When I was little, I need to go as an adult now because it's pretty unbelievable over there.
Arizona native, born and bred here in Tucson, and I've never been to the Grand Canyon.
What? We should meet there.
Hey, I'm game.
Let's take the kids. Just put leashes on them so they don't try to jump off the damn Grand Canyon. Yeah, awesome.
All right, we'll wrap up with one that we've included in every single interview. This is our staple. What is your favorite movie that you are ashamed to admit?
Guilty pleasure.
I gotta think about this. I guess it depends what you say, what you would mean by my guilty pleasure. Like what I guess would be an embarrassing movie that I say that I like.
Okay, I'll give you my example because I feel like my example is a perfect one.
Yeah.
Devil Wears Prada would highly be considered a chick flick because it totally is. So that is my guilty pleasure. I enjoy the performances. I don't really care about the fashion necessarily, but the performances are very good. So that's a chick flick. So that's a guilty pleasure for a dude. In most cases.
Yeah, I think the movie Hitch, that kind of falls into that category.
Chick flick. That's a chick flick. Yeah. But Will Smith though. I mean, come on. It's Will Smith.
And Kevin James too. I'm a big Kevin James fan, so it's a very very corny movie, but if it's on, I'll watch it. Very good.
That's one of the best answers I've heard in a while. That's solid.
That's a good one. I have mad respect for that because Hitch is one of my favorite movies too. Oh yeah. Good times. Well, with that, we have reached the end of the road on Sports Amigos. Ryan, thank you so much for hanging out with us, taking time to answer some questions in the middle of the week. And as football season, volleyball, soccer, and everything really get winding up and everybody in the business starts to really grind. good luck to you. Have a good, safe season. And as we always do, actual beverage or fake beverage, we always cheers to end the show.
Beverage
and yeah, but it is true, Brandon, as we always have, you are now, Ryan, an honorary and official sports amigo. Thank you so much, and we greatly appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
My pleasure.